Hi, I'm Cassie, and you're watching TIGR Review's Go Eco on the Indie Game Report. Go Eco from Eco Entertainment is a 2 to 3 player card game, or up to 6 players if you have a second deck of cards. Players will be competing to be the first to reach the game-winning score by collecting cards into their hands which make up ecosystems. The game is really easy to play and only comes with a deck of 51 cards and tons of gorgeous artwork. So let's go take a look and I'll show you the basics of how to play the game, and then I'll tell you what I think of Go Eco. In Go Eco, players are working to be the first to reach a predetermined number of points by collecting cards into their hands which make up ecosystems. These points may range from 50 to 100 points or greater, depending on how long players choose to play. Players start with a hand of 8 cards, and on each player's turn, they will either choose to draw a card and then play or discard a card, or they will choose to score points. The types of cards players are going for are ecosystem cards, as these are the cards which score points, but there are other cards called Go cards as well, which don't provide points but do affect the game. Thief and Trapper cards let you steal cards, while Guardian cards cancel their effects. Neutralizer cards are bad and prevent you from being able to score if you have one played on you, but you can remove them from your play area if you play a Protector card. The ecosystem cards are made up of 4 ecosystems: Polar, Desert, Oceanic, and Lowland, as well as 5 members of the food chain for each ecosystem: Primary Producer, Primary Consumer, Secondary Producer, Tertiary Consumer, and Decomposer. There are also 4 types of Energizer cards which are part of the ecosystems: Sun, Soil, Wind, and Water. If a player wishes to score points, they must start their turn with 6 scoreable cards which include at least a Primary Producer, Primary Consumer, and Decomposer of the same ecosystem. The remaining 3 scoreable cards may be Energizer cards or more parts of the ecosystem food chain. There is one more card, the Clown card. Clown cards are not worth any points, but up to 2 may replace the required ecosystem cards for scoring requirements. Each food chain card in the scoring hand is worth 3 points, and each Energizer card is worth 2 points. Any other cards are not worth points, and in fact, if any players at the table have a neutralizer card in their hand, they lose 3 points for each card. If a player scores on their turn, they are the only one who earns points. If they've reached the point threshold, they win the game. If not, the cards are shuffled back up and 8 new cards are dealt to players. Those are the basics of Go Eco. The first thing that I want to talk about with Go Eco is the artwork, as that was the original part of the game that drew me to the game. The artwork is gorgeous, and there's something about it that makes me feel like, you know when you've been stuck indoors all day, and then you finally get to go outside and you're just like, oh, finally, and you can just breathe the fresh air and feel the sunshine on your face. That's kind of like the feeling I get when I'm looking at this game. Like, first of all, the sun itself is just smiling and you feel warm and happy when you see it. And like the Protector card that is Rain has a face drawn into it, and you feel like, you know, 'cause it's a Protector card, so it's supposed to help balance against those bad neutralizer cards. And you feel good when you play it, and because of how it looks. And that's just kind of the feeling that I get from this whole game. When I first saw it, I was like, wow, what is that game? It's really gorgeous, looks really interesting. Go Eco, what's that got to do with, you know, ecosystems and the environment? And I just was so attracted to it, and I'm really happy to just look at this game. There is something about the cards though that I didn't like, and that was the graphic design in the corners to help you understand what cards are in your hand. I felt like there was just a lot going on with them, and none of the iconography is really explained in the rules, so you have to hopefully figure out what the icons mean. And I don't know if they were necessary, because there was just like a lot of duplicates. I think like the title of the card would also be the summary of some of like the acronyms in the cards, and I don't know, maybe I'm sounding like I'm confused, but I don't know, the iconography I think could have been better, and like I said, it also wasn't really explained. But other than that, I thought that the way that the game looked was just great. And it's only 51 cards, so you can't really, you know, mess that up too bad, can you? I mean, it's not like there's tons of components. I really like the theme of Go Eco, in that you're trying to, first of all, you're trying to learn how to make an ecosystem, what makes up an ecosystem, and then you're trying to build this ecosystem. And there are a lot of science games in the board game industry. Of course, there could always be more. Don't get me wrong, I love the science-themed games. But I have yet to see a game that's actually about the ecosystem. And I thought this was a really fun way, although this is a light way of explaining the ecosystem. I still found it a fun way to understand how it starts from a primary producer and there's fungi all over the place, and then it can end with a tertiary consumer. And it was just really interesting to see that path. Another thing too is like I enjoyed the inclusion of cards like seaweed and soil because those are relevant to an ecosystem, but I also enjoyed the cards as well like clean and green, which don't necessarily have, technically to do with an ecosystem, but they do make you remember that you're a part of this too, and the things that you do affect the ecosystem. So stay green and recycle, The gameplay of Go Eco is really easy. All you have to do is draw a card and then play a card or discard something from your hand, or choose to score. There was stuff in the rules though that were pretty ambiguous, and there were some rules that just weren't mentioned at all that I had to ask about because I was unsure of. For example, at some points I would have more than 8 cards in my hand. At one point I had 10 cards in my hand based off of the cards that I was playing and drawing and things like that. And there's nowhere in the rules where it says that your hand size is always 8, and so I wasn't sure. I asked about it and I learned that your hand size is always 8. And so there was just some things like that in the rules that I wasn't really quite sure about that made the first round go a little rocky, I guess. But overall, the gameplay is very easy. Like I said, you're drawing a card and then you're playing or discarding a card. Or you're scoring. I mean, there's not much else going on. One of the things that I noticed about the gameplay is that it ends up becoming more about who's going to be the first one to lay down cards to score, as opposed to who's going to have the most points to score. It was more about a race of making sure you were the first one to have the 6 scoreable cards compared to your opponent, and especially with 2 players. And if you're not paying attention to the cards that your opponent is discarding, you're gonna miss out on some of those cards that you could take and prevent them from scoring with. Or you might have cards that they need in your hand and then you accidentally discard them and then they can retrieve them. So you have to be paying attention to what your opponent is discarding a lot, because like I said, you don't want them to reach that point where they can have the 6 scoreable cards. I also did not find that it happened very frequently that a player would choose not to move into scoring because you don't know if your opponent's going to do it, and once one of your opponents scores, you can't. So it felt more like it was a race of who could be the first person to play cards, as opposed to a race of who could have like the best ecosystem. One of the things that I'm still like unsure about with Go Eco is the scoring. So you need to have a minimum of 6 scoreable cards in order for you to choose for your action of your turn to score. But 2 of those 6 scoreable cards can be clown cards, and clown cards don't earn you any points. So I was kind of confused about why clown cards could be considered as scoreable cards to enter into the scoring option when you don't earn anything from them. I also felt it was kind of strange that, first of all, the game kind of makes you feel like you really want to have one of each of the 5 cards of a food chain. And that's kind of what's cool about the game, is when you have one of each and when you can, make this really cool, full, complete food chain. But in the scoring, there's nothing that incentivizes that. There's no multiplier of points. I mean, each card that's a part of the food chain is worth 3 points, and then Energizer cards, which are also scoreable cards, are worth 2 points each. So you do get like an additional point for each card you have that's part of the food chain. But I feel like there was no incentive to want to get more food chain cards compared to the Energizer cards, even though they're worth more points. It's still kind of like that, like I said, that race of you want to be the first person to have the 6 scoreable cards. And I feel like for this kind of game, it would feel more enjoyable as a player to have this incentive to maybe wait just in case you can get that tertiary consumer, or maybe you can just get that 4th final Energizer card so you can have one of each. Just something to make me feel more like set collecty. You know what I mean? And that's what Go Eco kind of is all about, right? is you want to have a full hand of cards from the primary producer to the tertiary consumer and fungi, because like that's where the lure is, that's where the draw is having a complete ecosystem in front of your hands. Not that the points are bad, but I don't know, I just wanted a little more incentive to complete my food chain. I also didn't like that if you have a neutralizer card in your hand, even if you're not the player to be the one to enter into scoring, you still will lose points for having that card in your hand. And I understand that the game is trying to say, hey, you need to not hold onto these cards, play the cards, but I didn't even get to score, so I'm also losing points. So it's like losing twice as many points because my opponent got to score and I didn't, and then I also have to lose points for having this neutralizer card in my hand. So I just felt like the scoring could have been cleaned up a little bit. Overall, I think that Go Eco is an easy game to play. It's not a table hogger. It can be really fun to play. I just feel like with a little bit of the scoring tweaking, you're really going to see that players and the game Go Eco are both going to be working towards the same goal of having, you know, a complete ecosystem free of calamities. If you're interested in learning more about Go Eco, there are links down below where you can also find the Kickstarter campaign. If you like this video, please feel free to leave a comment or subscribe. And if you would like the Indie Game Report to check out your game, check out our website down below. Thanks for watching TIGR Reviews Go Eco from Eco Entertainment. I'll see you next time.